Okay, what I want to do today is give you an understanding of what's happening with mobile blocking from our latest figures. But I also want to give you a sense by the end of this that there are two webs. What we're seeing is the introduction of two webs. So by the end of this webinar, I want to impress on you the idea that there's the normal web, which we are used to, and there's something new, something that's emerging. And let's call it, by way of shorthand, let's call it blocked web. Now, the first big story that we heard with ad blocking in the end of last year was that Apple is going to be updating iOS 9, its new mobile operating system, and that update would introduce the possibility of having mobile content blocking. This was a much hyped story, and there was the hazard that there might be 300 million devices that would now be subject to ad blocking. So that's the first part of the story, and we're going to come back to that in a second. But I also want to introduce you to a web browser that you may not be familiar with if you're joining us from the West. Whereas if you're from Asia or the Pacific region, you will be very familiar with this. So this is UC Web, UC Browser. It comes under various names, always beginning with UC, and actually it's owned by Alibaba. It's a wildly popular browser with hundreds of millions of users. So UC has offices in China, in India, in Vietnam, in Russia, and in Indonesia, and it is growing massively in those areas. And Samsung also joined the mobile ad blocking discussion in January of this year, when it announced that it was going to enable users to install blockers in a similar way to how they can on Apple devices now. And then the final party that I want to talk about is Asus. So Asus announced in December last year that they were going to equip every single one of their new mobile devices, so 30 million devices, according to what they told their investors at a recent earnings call, that 30 million Asus devices would come pre-installed with a browser that was blocking by default. So this is a range of different ways of blocking on mobile, and I just want to take some time to talk about what actually happened. So the first thing is that after 7 months and an awful lot of hype, only 4.5 million people installed content blockers on iOS. So far, this has not been a major story. There has not been a lot of impact on iOS from what Apple did back in September. Now, to go into those figures a little bit, that's 4.5 million after 7 months, and 1.9 million of those are in the United States. So in the United States, only 2% of people who have bought an Apple device capable of having content blocking on it, only 2% of US users are actually doing that at the moment. Samsung's way of implementing blocking is actually similar. So it might be that the figures from Samsung will be underwhelming. And also, it's no longer clear whether Asus will actually do what they intended to do. I think their intention was, at least, that it was to partner with AdBlock Plus, a very, very prominent ad blocker, and to use AdBlock Plus to block by default in the browser that it would ship with its 30 million devices a year. Now there's a question mark over whether they are actually happy to partner with AdBlock Plus. There may be reasons that we're not aware of around that. There's a question about what's happening with Asus. So essentially, everything there, Apple, Samsung, and Asus, are not major stories. The major story is actually UC Browser. Major, hugely popular browser, which many people in the West are not aware of, but I think they will probably get a sense of what it can do and why it's an issue as we talk through this webinar. So what I want to do is turn to one of the pages of our mobile report, and this is where we try to lay out the entire landscape of mobile ad blocking. And I want to describe in what I'm looking at here. This is the mobile ad blocking landscape page from our recent report. What we're seeing here is a kind of a hierarchy of all of the different forms of ad blocking. So let's start off with the most important one. It's not that it's the most popular, but it is the most effective, let's say. So ISP blocking. This is where the network provider, the carrier, blocks at network level. In theory, this is the most effective form of ad blocking. Now, in practice, this is happening almost nowhere for legal reasons. So right now, the example that one would point to is the Digicel network in the Caribbean, where there's 10.8 million subscribers who are having all ads on their network, unless they're in feed, being blocked by the network provider. So that's a sign of what might happen if network neutrality regulation were weaker in some jurisdictions and permitted the networks, the ISPs, to block ads. And the motive for networks to do that is that they can force the advertising networks to then give them a cut. Let's move now to in-app blocking. So in-app blocking, which many people thought was not possible, is when the device or network enables blocking of ads that are appearing inside an app, which many people would have thought was protected. We're going to talk about that in this presentation as well. Moving on to the most popular form of blocking, whether on mobile or on desktop, browser blocking. Now, UC browser was an example of this, but there are many different types of doing this. The first approach, which we highlight here, is content blocking. So this is the Apple and Samsung approach, where you permit third parties to create particular apps that will block ads within the browser. Another option is that popular third-party browsers, well, popular and unpopular, some of them will block by default, and some of them will require users to opt into that blocking. And then the third option is that a device manufacturer equips their device with a browser that blocks by default, and this is what ASUS are talking about. And then finally, there is the single app, which might be built specifically to make life a little bit easier when using particular services or apps, and one of the side effects of that may be to block ads. So that's a complicated picture, but let me, in the next slide, boil that down to a simple hierarchy. At the top, you have the ISP, so the network providing the connection to the device. Then you've got the device itself. The manufacturer may opt to permit ad blocking. Then you have the browser, which may opt to permit ad blocking. And then you have extensions, which a user can add onto their browser and implement ad blocking. So I want to go through some figures here. And I want to start with the biggest ones. And these relate to mobile browsers that block by default. So plotting the growth here from December 2014 to March 2016, you see this rapid growth starting off well under 200 million in December 2014, but hitting over 300 million by October 2015, and now we're over the 400 million mark by March 2016. So we're at 408 million. Now, what that means is that 21% of all smartphone users in the world are using a mobile browser that blocks ads by default. So that's 408 million people, and 90% growth in the last 2 years. So these are absolutely enormous figures, huge figures. However, when you break this down by country, the picture changes. So there are really only 3 countries where you see tens of millions of people blocking ads using mobile browsers that block by default. For example, UC browser. And those countries are China, India, and Indonesia. So China with almost 106 million, India with over 120, all the way down, then finally Pakistan in number 4, which is at 10 million. So, for example, the figures in the West are very, very different. The United States is at 2.3 million, Germany is at 1.1 million, the UK is at 1.3, France is at 1.3 as well. So a totally different picture between the West and the East here. So let's zoom in on where this problem is most acute in this particular type of blocking. In Asia Pacific, you get some really remarkable figures. 36% of smartphones in Asia Pacific are blocking by default. Now, for the most part, we're seeing this happen in markets where data plans are expensive. They're a luxury. So you simply can't afford to be paying to download someone some third parties' ads. And the devices are quite a lot, in some of these markets, quite a lot slower on average than what they would be in more developed markets. And the connections are slower as well. So there is a clear benefit for the consumer in having a browser that blocks ads by default. It speeds up the device and it saves the user significant money. Now, this slide is talking about mobile browsers that block ads by default. But there's also another category, which is where people opt to add on things, for example, extensions to their browsers. So what I'm showing on the screen now, if anyone has dialed in by phone and can't see my screen, what I'm showing here is a picture of the installation window that you get when you install a browser called Opera. Opera is it's a reasonably popular browser. It wouldn't be in the top 3, for example. It's relatively niche, but people would be aware of it. Now, looking at traffic on PageFair's network across several thousand publishers, what we estimate from that traffic is that the most popular of these browsers that will permit you to install an extension, in this case, Firefox Mobile, the most popular has about 30 million people who have chosen to opt in to browser blocking. And beyond that, then, Opera and another browser called Maxton add on another 24. So significant figures for opt-in browser blocking, but nowhere near what you get with the browsers that block by default. But these figures, the opt-in browser figures, are more relevant to the West. Now, one of the big stories that came out of this report is nothing to do with web browsers. It's all about what happens inside apps. And what we announced in this report, based on extensive testing, was that in-app advertising can no longer be considered immune from ad blocking. Now, that's a big statement. So I want to draw your attention to a slide I'm putting up, and you'll get this image in the PDF of our report as well, available on pagefair.com. What you're seeing here is a grid. On the left-hand side of the grid, there are popular apps. And at the top of the grid, there is a selection of reasonably popular blocking tools that are able to block ads inside of apps. So in this case, you'll see that adblock, a VPN that you can install on your device, that adblock will be able to block ads in Facebook's in-app browser, in other browsers like Chrome, Safari, Firefox, but also inside publishers' browser, for example, CNN, BuzzFeed, and on Apple News, and things like Spotify. Now, this is very, very significant because many publishers, it seems to us at PageFair, may have viewed news about ad blocking over the last few years as suggesting that the web was a hazardous place because of ad blocking. And maybe it motivated some publishers to double down on their app strategies. And what we're saying here is that ads in apps, may be as vulnerable ultimately as ads on the web. And you can see by this table that that is the case for these particular publishers' apps today. So that's significant. Now, I want to dig into one particular example of a single app blocker. So what you're seeing here are part of the options screen for an app called Friendly Social. Friendly Social is an app that single-digit millions, let's say, of users, but primarily in the United States, have installed. And what it does is it lets them combine multiple Facebook account feeds. So there are many people who have more than one Facebook account. It lets them combine multiple Facebook account feeds into one place and to combine that with their Instagram feed as well. So it's a nice client for them to use for their Facebook information. And one of the benefits of this app is that it also permits that user to strip all ads out of Instagram and Facebook. Now, we raise this as an example of what is possible. The Friendly Social shows that developers can build apps as clients for platforms that one would assume to be immune from ad blocking. And actually, we're seeing now that ad blocking applies across the board, probably irrespective of whichever platform you're on, iOS or Android, and whether you have bought into Facebook or Apple News and so on, ad blocking is something that appears to apply across the board. Now, earlier when I gave a geographic picture, I was focused on Asia Pacific, but let's take a picture at what is happening in Europe and North America. So in Europe and North America, you're seeing radically smaller figures. You're seeing under 3 million in the United States and over 11 million in the EU. People are using browsers that block calls. So these figures are actually very, very small compared to what's happening in Asia Pacific. And for Apple's content blocking, you're seeing single-digit millions, and the same, even smaller actually, applies in aggregate for in-app blocking. However, I think this report should be interpreted in the West by publishers as a warning, similar to our reports back in 2013 and our reports in 2014. In those reports, going back some years now, when we were early to this problem of ad blocking, we were waving a flag and saying that this issue is going to grow. It is not going away, and that we need to pay real attention to it. So if you're a publisher in the West, this report about mobile ad blocking is clearly bad news for your counterparts in Asia Pacific, but it's also a warning that actually this problem in the next few years will probably become equally acute for you. And because we're presenting only mobile data in this report, it's useful to get a sense of what that mobile data looks like when compared with the data for desktop that we've released previously. And Mary Meeker, who is a partner at Kleiner Perkins, KPCB, a very prestigious venture fund, recently released her annual State of the Internet Trends Report. And in it, she used our data and actually she combined it. So what you're seeing is a combined chart here. The mobile figures are in blue, and they're sitting atop our desktop figures from 2015, late 2015, which are in red. So what you're seeing is a reasonably troubling curve there. So everything I've described now, I think, can be categorized as bad news. What I want to turn to now is good news. I think there should be two halves to this presentation. And in the remaining 10 minutes, let's talk just about the bad news, or good news. So the first good thing, I think, to know in the ad blocking story is that it is possible. We do this, and many of our competitors claim, and perhaps can, do the same thing. It is possible to serve ads in a manner that cannot be circumvented by ad blockers. And what this means, that although most people think of the blocked web, the place on the web where ad blockers are dominant, as an arid wasteland, actually, I think we should be thinking about the blocked web as a pristine virginal landscape. It's almost as though it's now 1995 again, and we have one time this space on the web where there are no ads to think about correcting the mistakes of the past and to start to show ads on the blocked web that fix the consumer problems that caused ad blocking. So in a sense, we're at this odd moment. It's a momentous one-time do-over opportunity. Now, some time ago, we surveyed ad blockers, and we asked them what type of formats could they tolerate. So these are people who block ads now. These are not general users. And what we found is that between 61 and 67% of people are happy to accept, to some extent, text, picture, and video ads, provided the video is skippable. Now, this is a heartening result. What it suggests is that people who are blocking ads will accept ads that are respectfully presented, that don't jump around the screen, that don't snoop on their data. And what this means is that there's a segment on the internet where the problem that applies elsewhere on the web does not apply. There is an imbalance on the majority of the web between far too many ads and far too much attention. And yet on the blocked web, the dynamic is the reverse. There's plenty of attention and there are no ads right now. The question is what to do with that space. The first, I think, way to think about this problem is to recognize that ad block users are actually probably, ultimately in the longer term, a good thing for publishers. On the one hand, you might think of these people as causing harm today, and that is true. But one thing that's interesting about an ad block user is that not only do they have attention, they are also definitely not ad fraud bots. Whereas when you think of a normal person on the web, this person has very little attention for ads, and they may very well be a bot, a fraud bot. So I think we need to start thinking about this second part of the web, the blocked web. And let me just close by saying that I think there are two domains now on the web. There is the normal web, which we're used to. And this normal web is beset by ad clutter and fraud. And probably because of the consumer issues it has caused, it is shrinking. But the second domain, the blocked web, has no clutter and it has no bots. So while one might continue to pursue advertising operations entirely the normal way on the normal web, one can start to think about using the blocked web in a different way. Perhaps one can serve more respectful ads that solve the consumer issues that caused ad blocking in the first place there. So let me just turn to what I think is a bad idea. There are quite a few publishers at the moment who look upon ad block users as enemies, and they regard a good result as one in which somewhere between 40 to 10% are willing to switch off their ad block walls or to whitelist in order to access the site content. So they literally implement the equivalent of a paywall strategy and set up an ad block wall that demands that the consumer switch off their ad blocker. Now, what this does for the majority of publishers is it sends the vast majority of those very, very valuable users off to competitors. And to me, that seems very, very short-termist, because if we serve these people ads that don't snoop on their data, if we serve them a smaller quantity of ads that will respect them and that don't jump around the page or autoplay video, this is a segment that can be a premium segment for brands that are looking for an uncluttered space. So before we get some questions going, let me just make a quick summary here. The first point is mobile ad blocking is clearly very, very much more significant in Asia Pacific, where it is dominated by web browsers on mobile that block by default. However, this is a warning for the West for what can happen here and what probably will happen. The third point is that apps are no longer invulnerable to ad blocking, and this is a major factor. And the fourth point is that ads can be shown on the blocked web, and we have to start really thinking about solving the consumer issues and rebuilding that relationship we have with users on the blocked web in a more respectful way, but in a way that still uses advertising to support us as publishers. I hope this has been useful. I've tried to keep it very brief. We've been speaking for 25 minutes, but if anyone has time, let's open this up to some questions. If anyone has any questions about the discussion so far. Does anyone have questions? Hello? Anybody? So I'm just reading through the comments. There's quite a few people who weren't able to hear anything, and yet there were people who could hear perfectly. So I think this is an issue for the sound on your own device, and if you can hit the unmute button, that would be a useful thing. One person has just typed in a question. Do you mean native apps or web apps or both? This is viewer 50. Viewer 50, I don't know what you mean by native app. What we're describing here is a situation where an ad that is shown inside any app that can be downloaded from an app store should no longer be regarded as being immune from ad blocking. So essentially, we're talking about all apps. I will make the presentation available after this meeting. Yes, sorry, viewer 50, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. That if you download an app from an app store, and if the ad blocking community has made an effort to block it, that is something that they may very well be able to block. And we've given a sample of very popular, what you're referring to as native apps. We're giving a sample of very popular native apps that are today being blocked. Now, sorry, viewer 60, when you estimate impact will grow in the West. So we have, if you go to pagefair.com actually, if you just go to pagefair.com and hit the Insights button, you will be presented in the middle of that page with a map of the world. That map currently shows data for desktop ad blocking only, but we will be updating these data with mobile figures as well. And what we show currently in the desktop figures is a trend, is a curve. And you can see the curve for Belgium, which is what you're interested in, and you can compare that with other markets. On the general question of what is happening, when will this impact this mobile ad blocking? When will it impact the West? I think there's a few vectors that we need to be conscious of. First, as more mobile blockers or mobile browsers implement ad blocking in some shape or form, it becomes a Me Too feature. It becomes a feature that more and more browsers will have to implement. So this means that more manufacturers of devices and more browsers in the West are going to have to follow the example, probably, of what their competitors elsewhere are doing. And if that happens, we might see that the impact is felt in the West in a very, very short space of time, maybe 1 or 2 years. If that doesn't happen, we could be talking about 3, 4, maybe 5 years. But it's a question that is in the short and medium term, I think. Someone has just made a very good point about latency, and that's viewer 26. PageFair, together with an awful lot of publishing trade groups, including FIPP, has put together global stakeholders for discussion about how to tackle the blocked web. And you can find the key points of agreement between advertising agencies, consumer groups, browsers, and publications and trade bodies representing publications. You can find that in our blog at pagefair.com. One of the conclusions was on latency. And the question is just how low you would have to make the latency for this to work. But our approach when we're serving ads in the blocked web is to reject ads that are over a certain file size, or depending on how the publisher implements us, to condense the ad so that it serves very, very quickly. And at the same time, we also reject active JavaScript for 2 reasons. First, there's a problem with the speed, right, with the bandwidth cost to the user and the page load cost, but also because that neutralizes the security problem of having active JavaScript in the ad. Okay. I have, by the way, made sure that your microphones are unmuted. So if anyone just wants to speak a question, please do so. Are there remaining questions that? Sorry, there is a question I missed. So viewer 48 has, what about a blocking solution that would enable users to get a percentage for every ad that they allow? There are a few solutions like that. One is called Brave. It's been deployed by the person who invented JavaScript. Essentially, what you're describing is a micropayments mechanism, and I have my doubts about micropayments. Although we now have the blockchain, and there are possible ways to make this work technically, micropayments have been suggested since the 1960s with a project called Xanadu as a way to pay for content digitally. And to date, they have all failed. So it's an interesting idea, and I think it would be very attractive because it suggests that the consumer of content would have that direct relationship with the content provider. That's a very attractive thing. But over several decades, in fact, half a century, we have not seen it actually work. So people are trying it, but I do think that the main mechanism, the only mechanism that supports content on the web, that supports the diversity of the web, is advertising. And over the first 20 years of advertising on the web, we've seen the consumer experience grow markedly worse. And it seems to me that we have this historic do-over opportunity to make the next 20 years on the blocked web a better one. Okay, everyone, we're now over the half-hour mark. Thank you very much. I hope this has been useful. If you have any questions, please email me. And again, to FIPP, who made this happen and who we partner with, thank you so much for making this happen. Thank you, everybody.